I wanted to talk about your book that you wrote. It's called Layla, Clapton, Santana, and MK Ultra. It's been a number of years since you've been on the show. Tell the people a little bit about your story and how you started. You finally finished your book. Why you wrote your book? Go ahead.
Well, because of us not being allowed to go public, and even the media refused to even respond to my email. I wrote CBS and ABC and all of our news, even some of the celebrity gossip columns, and my own Missouri rep, Jim Guest, who does interviews sometimes, and he won't put me on his radio show, and he don't even respond to my emails. He's a socialist, but anyway, he needs to respond to my emails anyway. So I said, the heck with all of them, I'll just write a book. And so it's a rundown of everything I've basically been talking about the last few years and what I've witnessed, life and death around me, you know.
Right. I know you were on my show a number of years ago. Let's recap and start from the beginning so people understand what happened to you. And as we go through this, you've given me an outline of all your synopsis of all the chapters in your book. Mm-hmm. And it really takes people on a roller coaster ride from when you were a child and moving right to adulthood and to the present day. Tell us about your story. Go ahead.
It's actually dedicated to families of missing persons. It's 19 chapters, 275 pages. The first chapter I named, The Lord is My Shepherd, because I remember my real mother walking through the house with a candle teaching us the 23rd Psalms and other prayers. And she was teaching us about God is what she was doing, you know, to hold on to that. And I'm so thankful. It's one of the best things, or probably the number one best thing that ever could have happened to me was had a mother with the insight to teach us that way. So it goes on to my earliest memories of people in the United States not being aware of Operation Paperclip. We don't have a free press. To this day, we still don't. Our news media is very fascist. They're blocked from putting things out there. Even when they know something's true, even when they have evidence, they're not allowed to put it out there. And people actually contacted the local newspaper, the Daily American Republic, to no avail. I personally saw 3 of those people that came to the house and wouldn't put nothing in their paper. And then,
and tell us, you know, Debbie, tell us what happened to you as a child. I mean, how did you get involved in these beatings, these rapes, these tortures that were going on that you report in your book? Tell us so people have an understanding of how you as a child did this.
What they did is they actually had plans on putting my mother away in the state hospital, and they had to make sure that she could never get out. So when she was praying and she thought that she was hearing God's voice, then he started yelling at her, saying to kill them twins and to chop them up in pieces and throw them in Black River. And she actually thought she was talking to God, and she was actually going to kill us in a thunderstorm one night. And I saw the knife, and she ended up not killing us. So what happened is the sheriff shows up, I guess, in just a day or two, and said that he knew that she was going to kill our kids. Well, there wasn't no way for him to know it except the illegal wiretaps that was in the house, because that was actually connected with the CIA and the Nazi Party, and Butler County, Missouri is the main headquarters and the main mass grave site in the United States.
And you said that's in Butler County? I remember we talked about this before, mm-hmm. Butler County, Missouri, right?
Right. We were the number one headquarters. There's a lot of headquarters in other states and stuff like that, but we were number one. We was the mass grave site, probably the biggest mass grave site. But we had a local children's home called Edgewood, and people tried to get us put in that, but they didn't take us there. What he did is put me with one family and put my twin sister with a different family. And so, and that chapter is called The Mind Benders. That was chapter 2. And just how we was learning, you know, about what was going on, because it wasn't something that was in a paper. People was not aware of what was going on until they were the next person to be victimized. Well, instead of them putting Mother away, they decided maybe they could make some money off me and my sister one way or another. But we could sing and dance, and they even wanted to put us in movies like tap dance, and like they bragged that we would be the next Shirley Temple type and be a gold mine, moneymaker for them. And I was determined I wasn't going to do that. So I didn't mind being poor, as long as the Nazis wasn't getting a hold of nothing. I didn't want to do things their way. So then Chapter 3 is called Hell on Earth, and it's my early life with my so-called new family and their lives, their kinfolks, the neighborhoods, and some of what I was witnessing, what I was learning. The Invisible Curtain, Chapter 4, early memories of the beatings and rapes and tortures, and no help ever came. And it's just
tell us about when you were put in these families, what happened to you when you were put with this family?
Well, there was multiple complaints to the local welfare office, which is the Child Protective Service, and to the sheriff departments and the police department and stuff like that. And we were never removed from the people that were brutalizing us. And so this is how we were learning that law enforcement was actually one of them also. They were like the leaders of the pedophile rings, because that's what Satanist is and Nazism is, they're pedophile rings. So, and there was a lot of, I was beat virtually every day, raped all the time, tortured, and I was unconscious a lot from ether put on a rag and put over my face, and I would wake up with shots on my hips, and these people would give me shots, and I actually never knew what they were giving me, but I was told many years later that it was cocaine and birth control, so I was some kind of birth control experiment, and when early birth control was invented, and it was getting popular like in the early 70s, only married women could have it. In some states, single women couldn't even have it. But it was causing tumors to grow on some women. Well, eventually the damage caught up with me, and by the time I was 25, I had multiple tumors and internal bleedings, and my female organs were just destroyed because of that. So, and that could have been connected with whatever kind of birth control experiment I was. We were different kinds of experiments, flus and stuff like that, dental and stuff. The next one is Conspiracy of Silence, Chapter 5, and this is from 71 to 73. The last two houses I lived with the Nazi families I couldn't get away from.
Did you go to different families? I mean, did they just you said
No.
You said earlier that you found out that law enforcement and Child Protective Services was involved in this, and basically putting you into unsafe homes instead of protecting you. Tell us about the different portions of your life, how you move from family to family, I guess, right?
Well, actually, I was forced to stay with one family, and their job was to keep beating me and torturing me and forcing me to keep my mouth shut, and I wouldn't do it, I'd go to school with black eyes and stuff like that and choke marks on my neck, and I'd pull up my dress and show the other kids that I was beat up, so I wouldn't keep my mouth shut. So they just kept beating me more. But I stayed with the one family that I couldn't get away from, and like I said, everyone that was around them knew they were nuts and knew what was going on, but people refused to get involved. It was kind of special to them, or whatever you want to call it. They watched some of us 24 hours a day, and we couldn't just keep on reaching out and trying to contact people, because what they would do is, as we were hostages, they could hurt someone that we cared about, or kill someone that we cared about, So anytime someone around us died, of course we worried about it. But I stayed with that one family, and one of the last houses I lived in is where the mass grave site is. So and that road happened to be called Northwood Lake Road. And it was a dead end with just a couple houses and then a trailer on the end of it. And then they bulldozed and put gravel just a little ways beside of it, and that was where the mass grave site was. And that kind of joined the house that we bought up there, and 4 miles from Wapatilla Lake, which is the beginning of Wayne County, Missouri. So I just tell a little bit about the neighbors, and some of the things that was going on, and a little bit of survivors, because we found a little bit of people alive that we got home. And they were told secretly to don't trust anybody in the state of Missouri. Just get a hold of the FBI in your own state and have them to get someone to watch the sheriff department for us, secretly sneak in here for 1 hour. All we ask is 1 hour. because they would have known. And it was 1984 before we got federal agents in here, and they said it took 1 hour. In 1 hour, we knew what was going on. Okay, so we were right for all them years. We just couldn't.
Yeah, how did you, just so people understand, you were involved in these beatings and rapes as a child, satanic worshiping. How did you find out about these mass graves and that people are actually being killed in this satanic worshiping rituals that were going on?
Not too awful long, a couple years before I moved to that location with that mass grave site. One of my friends, Eric Clapton, who I've mentioned before, a good friend of Carlos Santana, both of them are my ex-boyfriends. Eric is the one that told me that he witnessed the mass grave site. So what happened is they actually made him throw a body on it. I don't know if he saw the actual killing or not, but he was really upset and said, this militia that we have going, which was actually about gathering up evidence, we were more intelligence than we were actual militia. You know, we couldn't get together like a typical militia, which we named Missouri Militia 1, but it was all about intelligence, like I say. But and then he said, you're fixing to move out there. So we moved out there, and he says, well, I'm getting my government involved in it. So he got a package of information ready, and one of them that he wanted to send was, I was going to be their first contact. So he sent them some videos of me with him, a copy of the album that I made, Dressed in Love by Layla Christ. He produced that for me, and a couple other things. Well, just the most important things to where the mass grave site was. And so it wasn't too long, and I hadn't moved out there yet, but just within a couple weeks or real shortly after I met the first intelligence officer, the MI6 from England. I call him Bob Jones. Of course, it's not his real name, but when I met him, I asked him if he knew that we had a secret general that had evidence ready, and the guy wasn't too far away, and he says, tell me how to get there. And he says, you know, where you're moving, that's where the mass grave site is. And I says, no, I didn't know that. I knew that Eric witnesses. I didn't know it would be out there where I'm moving. So once I got moved out there and I met the neighbors, I realized that, man, I had neighbors messing around my house all the time, you know, and I was going to school with kids. David White was adopted. That was one house. The next house was the Pierce family. They were the main guards over that. They were the closest to it. And two of the girls that lived with them was called adopted, and then there was me, you know, that was called adopted. So there's them three houses together. Our sheriff at that time, for most of the time that I was forced to live with them for all my school years, 62 to 73, all through school years, you know, the sheriff for most of that was Clyde Hendricks. Well, Clyde Hendricks at the time also had three so-called adopted kids that lived with him. But we were called adopted, and we were called slaves, and the experiment. I hated being called the experiment because I didn't feel like a human when people called me that, you know. So that's kind of what Chapter 5 is about, and I call it Conspiracy of Silence, because if Conspiracy of Silence could keep us trapped, because the Nazis and what they were doing to us, and we didn't have a free press, I told people the best thing we could do is to have our own conspiracy of silence. We can't talk about this. We have to be really careful, and I'll do my thing and make sure evidence is going where it should, and y'all do your thing, and the less we say, the better. So silence is on our side also. Then my next chapter was called Kiss of Life, and it's basically some of my favorite religious verses, not all of them, but some of them that I live by, you know. Chapter 7, Mother on the Altar, it's flashbacks of a ritual human sacrifice. I talked about that on your program a few years ago.
Yeah, why don't we stop there for a minute and talk about this, because these three chapters you're talking about, 6, 7, and 8, are all related in a sense. Chapter 7, get into Mother on the Altar, flashback of some of these ritual human sacrifices, flashbacks of some of the early things happening to you. Why don't we get into that a little bit so people understand how these people used you as a child to take away basically your childhood. Go ahead.
Yes, they most certainly do intend to take away your childhood, and they intend to leave a lasting impression in your mind. And one of the shocks of life was watching a human sacrifice. I've seen a little bit other. I've seen a lot of bodies in my life. Most of them I didn't have to witness the actual killing, because it really does mess your mind up. But the Mother on the Altar, I believe I had just started first grade, and it was in the fall of '62. And the woman that they put me with, Helen, who was actually a single woman at